There are many ways to cycle nutrients in the garden, and one of the most popular is composting. But I want to share my most recent fascination in a highly accessible option known as chop and drop. Earlier in the summer, I tried this for the first time, and I also employed some trench composting techniques by mixing in kitchen scraps and bokashi bran. I want to share with you some of my deeper insights about why I think this is so valuable and how you can employ these techniques in your garden. I'm Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. Look at all this organic matter, all this mass. This came from the soil. What we typically do in our gardens is we remove, we take away. And then what do we have to do? Maybe as an urban gardener, you go buy a bag of compost and fertilizer and you put it back in the soil. What if we just took our plants that grew from the soil and from our garden ecosystem, chop them back up and offer them back to our soil? So I've done that in one of my raised beds, and it was a bit labor intensive. It was a hot morning, I was sweating, but I literally returned every part of the corn plant with the exception of the kernels back to the soil. I chopped it up. So let me back up here for a moment. This was really all inspired by my fall sowing of fava beans. These plants really were robust, and they were so full of life, all types of insects, beneficials, food for beneficials, and a ton of organic matter, as well as some fava beans for eating. So maybe it just hit me in my soft spot as a gardener, but they were so beautiful with so much biology. I really wanted to do more with them besides just composting them. Now, I knew a little bit about chop and drop as I began to develop this process, but really I used my intuition moving along. I started by cutting these bean plants at the base, and then I began chopping them up in small pieces, roughly about 4-inch pieces. Anytime you're composting or doing something like this, it's a benefit to have those materials chopped up into smaller pieces because they'll break down faster. So every fall, as the leaves start to drop, I proactively collect them and corral them next to my compost bin. And after I chopped up these beans, I started to layer them in with some of these leaves. This was somewhat of a lasagna style approach, just layering in browns and greens as I went along. This just started to feel like the right thing to do. Now, it was labor intensive, I'll give you that, but essentially it's one and done. I didn't have to turn a compost pile or water it or sift the elements to sort out, my harvested compost. It was just all in place, happening naturally, and I could continue to grow in that space. Fast forward to my spring planting of corn, where I took some lessons from processing the fava beans and refined the process a bit further. Here are some field notes from when I processed the corn. So I'm out here this morning and I'm ready to take on this mission with my corn, which is going to be removing the spent stalks. I've already harvested all my corn, and what I have left is that top growth. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is get in here with my loppers and cut all these corn stalks at the base. I'm going to temporarily offload them so that I can gain access to the raised bed, and from there I want to pull back the mulch, remove the irrigation lines, and then I'll have clear access to the soil. You'll notice that I didn't pull up the corn roots, and I don't want to disturb the soil any more than is necessary, and also I'll be leaving those critical carbon structures, namely the roots of the corn stalks, in the soil to break down. And this is when I decided to employ trench composting. I've been starting to play with bokashi composting, and after I harvested all this corn and grilled a bunch, I cut up the corn cobs into 1/2-inch pieces. I thought this is going to be a lot to add to my bokashi bin. It could potentially fill it up by 1/3 or more, and I just wanted to keep some diversity in there, make sure things are breaking down evenly. There is the concept of trench composting in garden soil, which is essentially you can bury food scraps directly in your garden bed, and they'll break down over time, provide nutrients to the soil food web and to future plants. I'm going to combine that approach with bokashi, and I'm going to bury that in 1 or 2 trenches in this raised bed. So now essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these corn stalks and I'm going to chop them up the best I can. Now, I did end up using a couple of sawhorses. It was just a challenge dealing with those corn plants. They were really robust, not the easiest to cut through. I used some big pruning shears. I used my bypass pruners. And I didn't really get them cut up into small enough pieces, or as small as I would have liked to. It's going to be a long time before this corn fully breaks down. This is an experiment, this is an approach, and I'm learning from the process. And again, I layered them with some brown leaves, but I added another element. I'm really attracted to kelp meal. It's just something that I've been using more and more in my containers and my raised beds. This adds elements of trace minerals and micronutrients, and they can be an attractive food source for soil-dwelling microorganisms. Now, when it was all said and done, I topped it off with a really thick layer of pine needle mulch, and I went back in with my drip irrigation grid, installed that, put it in place, and I watered it in multiple passes, just slowly, gently, kept moving throughout the raised bed, really allowing that moisture to permeate deeply, and I've been growing in it ever since. You know, this is not a new concept, but it's fairly new in my garden practice, but it's something that intuitively I've been feeling that I'm getting closer to. And nutrient cycling in my garden ecosystem, I think, is essential to really reach the point that I want to get to, which is regenerative urban gardening. We don't hear a lot about that. We hear about regenerative farming techniques, which are huge and essential because on that scale it's even more important. But in our home gardens, we have an opportunity to do the same thing. And just think about how rich that makes us, how that can benefit our environment and all the array of wildlife, insects, birds, pollinators, and things that we want to have. This is how we should be cultivating our gardens. Is it convenient? Not as much. Is it easy? It takes some work, and it also requires that you build some skills and comfort around it. However, in the end, you're really only spending your time and your sweat equity on this process. And what you're gonna get is nutrient-dense food because it's going to be nurtured by the soil that is continuing on this closed-loop cycle to work with your garden ecosystem to produce healthy, organic, regenerative food. And that's how we really increase sustainability. I am new on this journey. I am just beginning. I have been gardening here in this garden for about 16 years, but this is a new layer. So I have a lot to learn, but at the same time, I am going to share it. I'm going to share what I'm doing along the way so that you can see me, and if anything, it plants seeds in you to look at these different methods. All right, it's about 83 degrees with 75% humidity, so woo! Now check out more awesome gardening videos like this video and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food with your own food. Keep it organic.